Welcome to what's possibly the worst level in the game. I say possibly because it's worse because it requires a guide the most. As in, it's the first level to require a guide multiple times. But it's also a fun challenge, at least. Like, it has some fun, intellectually stimulating puzzles towards the end. Though right now, in this first floor, it's literally just combat. It amazes me how pathetic the ball and chain soldiers are, considering how far their ball and chain sends you when it hits you. You'd think they'd be a lot tougher than that. I really do love the fact that your roll attack is the spin attack, because it makes it feel like it deals as much damage as the spin attack, which I guess it does. Also, I love the fact that these Salphos are kind enough to not constantly jump backwards. That's sweet of them, because that would have been really annoying otherwise. The reason that the square formation is so helpful for combat is probably that you have all of the links bunched up closely together, so it's a lot more likely that all 4 links will attack the enemies at once. You can only take advantage of that with the horizontal formation when the enemies are like all in front of the links, which is less likely. And same goes for the vertical formation, which is used to pull levers like this, as you can see, but isn't really used for much else. See, it looks like I should be able to shoot the arrows over those things. They don't look like they're that high in elevation. They look like they're lower in elevation than the squares to the sides of them. So that's what confused me. You have a fun puzzle where you have to time hitting eye switches off screen. At least I think this one's off screen. But here's the first guide dang it moment. I return to this later. Something to compliment about this level is its non-linearity. Like, I believe you can choose any one of the 4 rooms at the... It is entirely possible to do it out of the order that the guide tells you to do it in. You can start with that room if you want to. Like, I could have finished that room right away if I only knew what to do. I muted the volume when I played this level because it's literally just the music from when you're going up the stairs to reach Ganondorf in both Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. So I felt like the music would really drone on after a while. I'm sure it's good though. Oh yeah, and here's another guide dang it moment. I come back here later, but it is impossible to know without taking a really long time what you're supposed to do there. I really don't understand why they couldn't have put the Pegasus boots on the well, not the L button, because in single player you need that to gather up all the links, but on the R button, you could have been able to dash at any time you wanted. Like, why do you have to have the R button be the one that pulls the levers? Why can't you just have the A button be a little more context sensitive and have the A button pull levers? That's like pull levers in statues. That's what it tends to do. I'm really proud of myself that I figured out that I could do that without a guide. Like, I don't know how I figured out that I could somehow, like, send the boomerang past a wall. Like, it's not like those walls are intangible. But I guess I got the idea that that's what the level design wanted me to do because there was no other way to progress. But if I can throw the boomerang over the wall, why not the bow? I mean, the bow is shot from a higher elevation as well as the boomerang. It's not like you're squatting on the ground when you're throwing the bow or boomerang. And yeah, here's a creative puzzle. I like this. You throw a link from the Dark World onto a switch to create floor, and then you go over to... I guess the point of creating the floor was for multiplayer purposes, because creating the floor seems pointless here. I wonder how rare it is on the internet to have a single-player exclusive Four Swords Adventures LP. Because, like, when you're actually playing it, like, most people would only get to play the single player, but the LPers would only want to bother if they could do the multiplayer. And here's where I got stuck and had to look up a guide. I did not see that cracked wall. I did not see any sort of crack at all until the guide pointed it out to me. Partially because it was so darkly lit. And it also takes advantage of the fact that you have to think that you're allowed to carry bomb flowers into other rooms, so you're actually able to do that. Oh yeah, bottomless pits will be your worst nightmare in this place because they are very cheaply placed. You will fall into them. You'll fall into them a lot. Like here was not a good place for a bottomless pit because those spikes. Well, those spikes are the real problem because they make it so that you have to be way too precise with the turning of the Pegasus boots, which is just not possible. Like, even if you turn correctly, you'll hit the wall and get knocked backwards into the pit. And it's stupid that you get knocked backwards by running into the wall, because it's not like you take damage from it. So how does that make sense? Wouldn't Link just splat on the wall and that's it? Just stay there? Like, that would have been much less annoying and been realistic. And the only reason they have you bounce off is to be realistic. I mean, it's not like... Do they have any puzzles that force you to dash into a wall and get bounced backwards onto something? Because they do in the Palace of the Four Sword, but that isn't in this game, ironically enough. And here's a fun puzzle. Although, it's, well, quote-unquote fun because it's entirely trial and error. Like, you have to memorize the level design. Like, falling and then looking below you. But it's impossible to see all of the room at once. Because in the GBA areas, you can't hold down the B button to make the camera pan out all the way. Naturally, since the screen is too small, so it wouldn't be able to pan out all the way. So it's trial and error figuring out where all of the chests are, and figuring out the entire landscape of the room requires you to travel around it, like manually. And you can tell it's a 2D section because for some weird reason, you can't climb stairs. Even though the stairs don't look like they're that much higher than you, why can't Link just, like, pull himself up them? Like in Wind Waker, when your character is facing a staircase, he can just pull himself up. I'm really glad that I happened to get below that chest and... Because I didn't see that door. Because the door sort of blended in with the blue background. So I'm really lucky that I managed to not have to look up a guide to go into that door. And here's some more poor level design. Because the traps completely overwhelm you because they move so fast and there's so many of them. And what's worse is that you're forced to rush because of the poorly placed Wallmaster. And you're standing on such a tiny floor, so again, it's poorly placed Wallmaster because it's guaranteed to grab you if you don't hurry. So it's very overwhelming and chaotic. You're basically guaranteed to constantly get hit and fall into the pit. Like, if it just had a few less traps, and the level design wasn't so cramped. And here's another part where I was forced to look up a guide. You have to make sure that you keep if you think of them as numbers, the ones that's numbered 3, 4, and 8, you shouldn't hammer in. Because that's so intuitive, right guys? I'm sure that's a fun puzzle to figure out for yourself in multiplayer. So that was extremely bad level design. The only way you would possibly know what to do is if you either looked up a guide or spent forever hammering the same stakes over and over. And this is a maze that it's only really for the most part it's a maze because it forces you into a GBA screen that looks completely separated from the screen above it that's on the TV screen. So it's harder to get the idea of how these two screens connect to each other. So you think that you're going to emerge from a place like to the side of where you actually will emerge. So as a result, it's kind of a tedious maze. In Twilight Princess, there's an orange rupee hidden behind the house of the pregnant lady, and you have no way of knowing it's there. Speaking of no way of knowing, how are you supposed to know that you can shoot arrows up onto the ceiling? It looks like you're going to assume that it's an invisible ceiling, but instead, shooting arrows up there sends the arrows at the eye switches that are above the area that you're in. But the problem is that when you're underground, you're on a GBA screen. So you feel like you're in a completely different dimension that's completely disconnected from the room above it. So you're not going to get the idea that if you shoot upwards into the gaps in the ceiling, you'll shoot up at the eye switches. Especially since logically, that would just cause the arrow to fly upwards, straight upwards out of the hole, and then fall straight down. There's no reason that they would suddenly go from flying upwards to bending to the north in mid-air, stopping in mid-air, mind you, to suddenly get back its momentum and go towards the eye switch. That is something that will only really work in a top-down Zelda game. So that was pretty ridiculous. And here you have a creative puzzle where you have to be standing so far away from the eye switches that there won't be any spikes spawned to get in the way of your bow and arrow, because apparently the spikes are high up enough that they'll block your arrows, even though they don't really look like they're raised that high. It's a time-consuming puzzle. It takes a little while to figure out. Like, obviously, like, it has to have it so that the spikes disappear, and therefore risk you running into them and getting hurt, because otherwise the puzzle wouldn't work, because you wouldn't be able to shoot the eye switches in the first place. I love that once you have the puzzle completed, you immediately get access to a free way to just immediately go straight down and get out of the room. That's oddly kind of the dungeon. And the reason I took a while to figure out how to do this is because for some reason you can't switch to a link that's in the dark world from the light world, and you can't switch to a link that's like, and vice versa too. So it took a while for me to figure out what I was supposed to do. I had to keep all of the links in the dark world and have each one individually go into a portal and go to a different switch each. So there you go. Like this is pretty interesting. Like, you have 4 portals in one room for the final dungeon. Like, I remember this happening in the area where you got clues from the Deku Scrubs. It would have been interesting if in Link's house in Twilight Princess there was the weird hand asking for paper. Like, I don't know, like, it would have been like a Majora's Mask reference, but I guess that game was already unoriginal enough as it is. Here's another terrible area of level design. You have bumpers that will, if you just even the slightest bit collide with them, they will send you flying and possibly into the pit. And then you have these guys, which their knockback will send you flying into the pit from attacking you. And they have a lot of knockback. And if you fall into the pit and then you get into formation, the other links will drag you right into the pit. So that's fun. At least there's only 2 of them. There's a surprisingly small amount of glitches in this game. With the jump glitch, up to 3 links float in the air and can walk and do stuff. You need a Roc's feather and a liftable object to do it. Pick it up, make the links jump, and switch them individually after a green's landed. The ones carrying an object will be floating. The floater can't jump. He can't leave the screen or switch to another link. Link's still bound by boundaries and will still fall down holes. proving that this doesn't really have actual elevation. But enemies can't harm him, nor can he harm them. That apparently is the extent of being programmed to be above the ground. That's so lazy. To cancel the glitch, you have to throw it or press L. If the object is thrown at an enemy when you're floating, it won't get hurt by it for some reason. And this puzzle was surprisingly intuitive to me because I'd never seen this object, this gray object before, but because there was a cannon and you get sent out of the cannon and there's really nothing else to do in this room, it just came naturally to me to downward thrust, and there you go. What's really weird is that I fall into a hole that's just to the north of this area, which is much larger than it. I don't know, it feels like falling into that giant hole should lead me to the same room as I would have fallen into if I fell into the tiny hole. Because it's not like, well, actually the tiny hole does lead you to a tiny room, but still, it just seems weird. It would have made sense if it was in a different screen, or if the tiny hole was on the completely different side of the room. So here you throw links over gaps in the 2D section. And it took multiple tries for me to downward thrust. I had to make sure that I didn't stop and hold down to do the downward thrust. All I had to do was just hold L and then let go of the control stick and press B. And I was fortunate enough to get it right the second time and press B at the right time. It sounds like this where I kind of wish that I had bombs, like as an actual item. Because it's easy to mistime that. I kept throwing the bomb because you get it farther that way. Because you're not allowed to roll when you have a bomb in your hand. Next up, the finale.